Mass Effect, a series with many memorable characters, deep themes, heartfelt moments, and good humor. But it's hard to straight up say that it is a well-written series. It is absolutely not written poorly. It is miles above the vast majority of video games. But it's tricky to just say that the writing is unambiguously good. The trilogy very clearly did not have its story planned out. The Collectors and the Crucible are central aspects of 2 and 3, and both come from out of nowhere. There's plot holes, contrivances, and certain choices you make that end up being meaningless. But the games end up feeling good as a whole package because of those strengths that I listed earlier, and most importantly among those is the characters. With only a handful of exceptions, the characters of Mass Effect are an absolutely standout cast with emotional depth that gets you very invested, and BioWare did a great job paying that investment off. One of those beloved characters that gets you deeply invested in them is Legion. And you might be wondering, if that's the case, how is there wasted potential? It's a character you get invested in. Isn't that BioWare sticking the landing? Not quite, because if you take a closer critical look at Legion and the Geth storyline as a whole, its arc and the satisfaction it brings collapse fast. One thing that hurts Legion is that there is another character who follows pretty much an identical story trajectory to them, but is handled much better. Mordin Solus. For a full analysis on every little thing they did perfectly with Mordin, you can check out this video of mine. Mordin and Legion are both proxies for story arcs present in the series, those being the Genophage and the Quarian Geth conflict. Both of these are connected to what the villain Saren does in Mass Effect 1, and they both have a character who joins your squad who represents one side of the conflict to explain it to the player. Then, in Mass Effect 2, you get a character who represents the other side of the conflict, and learn that the issue is more complicated than it seems. Rex is anti-Genophage, Mordin is pro-Genophage. Tali sides with the Quarians, Legion sides with the Geth. Then, in Mass Effect 3, these storylines are brought to a close in a manner decided by the player, as the characters from each side work together. I want to clarify that the conflicts differ significantly from an ethics standpoint, and the storylines are very distinct from each other. This isn't some lazy copy-paste. It's a phenomenal structure for what they're doing, so it's smart to use it twice in parallel. And we know this structure works well because the Genophage storyline is perfect. I really have no notes. I genuinely think it's one of the best storylines in any video game, period. So the Quarian Geth conflict has a lot to live up to, especially since it comes directly after the Genophage arc in Mass Effect 3. But it's fine if it's not as perfect. It's not a mark against the game that only one of their storylines is one of the best ever told, and the other is only great. But honestly, it's not great. I'll get back to this. First, let's focus on Legion themselves. Legion is a very interesting character, because when you meet them, they shatter a few conceptions that have been true of every single Geth you've encountered thus far. Until you meet Legion, Geth are universally hostile to you, and they do not speak. When you first see Legion, the only things you know about them are that they are not hostile to you, they can speak, they know who you are, and they are a Geth. So you're faced with this blatant contradiction for the rules established in the previous game and upheld so far in this one. You are then given a decision whether to sell Legion for cash or keep it for study.
I saw enough of these things I need in Prime. Space it.
No, you can't space it because that would be fucking stupid, Jacob, you goddamn idiot. Once you keep it for study, you then have to go and manually activate it. There's effectively no reason not to take this course of action, because by this point in the game, money is pretty much worthless, and if you don't activate Legion, they just sit there doing literally nothing. But the fact you have to make the choice to keep them, and then manually activate them, gives you a very strong buy-in. You are taking the active role in figuring out this mystery. It's not just introduced and then immediately explained. Once you talk with Legion, they agree to join your squad, almost always being the last character to join your crew in Mass Effect 2. And that's the first huge issue with Legion, when they're introduced. Multiple times throughout Mass Effect 2, the game forcibly starts a mission once you've met certain parameters. There are only 2 missions that the player starts of their own volition: the final suicide mission in the Collector base, and the collection of the Reaper IFF. However, the game still forces your hand at starting the final mission. After you collect the Reaper IFF, it starts another countdown, where after you complete 2 missions, the crew of the Normandy gets kidnapped, and then the longer you take to rescue them from the Collector base, the more of them die. This means there are only 2 spots throughout the game where you can take your time, do any mission you like, and move entirely at your own pace. One spot is post-game, after you have beaten the Collectors, and the other is after the mission on the derelict Collector ship before acquiring the Reaper IFF. This is the only mission in the game where there is absolutely nothing that pushes or forces you to start it at a certain time. So this is the best time to do the DLC, get stronger, and most importantly, do the crew's loyalty missions. Doing a character's loyalty mission has a few benefits, but the main reason to do it is to get the character's loyalty, as a loyal character is more likely to survive the final mission in the Collector base. These missions make up the bulk of the main content of Mass Effect 2. To get the best ending, you want to do the majority of content before starting the mission to acquire the Reaper IFF. And that mission is where you recruit Legion. This means Legion has an absolutely minuscule presence in Mass Effect 2 unless you save all the DLC for post-game. In my video on Mordin, I talk about how his strong and frequent presence in the game gives him a ton of room to breathe and develop a strong, complex relationship with Shepard, so you can see how Legion suffers from a small presence. The poor guy is sidelined super hard. You have to have the majority of their in-depth conversations in the post-game, when you have already exhausted every other character's dialogue long ago. You have to go so far out of your way to have all the possible conversations with Legion. Compare again to Mordin, whose conversation progression is worked so naturally into the flow of the game, thanks to his position by the weapon upgrade station, which you constantly visit. Legion does at least have one thing to kind of make up for it, in that they and Tali have a huge amount of unique dialogue. One of Mass Effect 2's biggest issues is that the characters all pretty much entirely ignore each other and only talk to Shepard, so it's nice to see an actual character dynamic. However, this really doesn't fix the issue, because realistically, you'll only see the dialogue you get for bringing Tali on Legion's loyalty mission, as well as their argument. Bringing Legion on Tali's loyalty mission has a ton of super interesting interactions, but it straight up does not make sense in the context of the mission. It pushes way too far out of suspension of disbelief that she could be acquitted of the charge of bringing active Geth onto the fleet while standing next to the active Geth she brought onto the fleet. There's a cute scene if you bring Legion on Tali's recruitment mission, but if you are seeing the scene, it means you fucked up, and will either lose crewmates in the Collector base or head in with Tali or Legion not loyal due to the mission timer. So even with this great dynamic, Legion is still left with a small presence, and it's vital to note that Legion was not written with this late entrance in mind. In fact, they were originally supposed to be one of the earliest companions in the game, and they have dialogue for missions they literally cannot take part in.
I'm offering to be your friend. You don't want to be my enemy.
There is a high statistical probability of death by gunshot. A punch to the face is also likely.
According to Legion's writer, Cris... According to Cris L.,
the reason Legion has dialogue in every mission is because originally, its acquisition could come much earlier in the game. The late-game critical path point of acquiring the Reaper IFF was going to be a separate mission. That additional work that seemed unnecessary when the IFF could be neatly folded into what already existed for Legion's acquisition with a few dialogue changes. The drawback is that now you're forced to choose between hearing half of Legion's dialogue, its latter 2 Normandy conversations, and saving Normandy's crew by heading through Omega 4 immediately after they get captured.
That is a monumentally stupid trade-off. To learn about a character, you have to arbitrarily let half the crew die. Just straight up moronic. The worst part is how easy it is to fix this. I've mentioned in the past that I use a save editor to collect certain footage, but it has plenty of other uses. One thing you can do is prevent the automatic trigger of the crew getting kidnapped. By doing this, you can do the Reaper IFF mission as soon as you get it, and recruit Legion while still having plenty of content left. This completely and entirely fixes the issue of them getting sidelined. Making it so you manually trigger the abduction helps Legion so much, because you are no longer forced onto a timer to finish the game as soon as you recruit them. Anyways, I hate this section so much I could do a whole video on how it's poorly written and designed, but we're just going to move on. As much as this design decision hurts Legion, it does mean that many people miss out on issues that crop up in the Geth Quarian storyline in Mass Effect 3. If you only had half the possible conversations with Legion, your understanding of Geth philosophy is going to be significantly more simplistic, and thus you miss the blatant contradictions presented in Mass Effect 3. The entire resolution of the Geth storyline is built not on following through what we know about them, but rather entirely changing their wants and desires. It starts off pretty good. The reunion with Legion makes sense and is quite interesting. The writing at this point in the story does stay consistent with Mass Effect 2. The conversations between Shepard and Legion follow up Mass Effect 2 very well. Legion gives a logical explanation as to why the Geth are now working with the Reapers, and they tell you what the outcome of the choice you made at the end of their loyalty mission ended up being. After you're done on the Normandy, you decide which of two missions you want to undertake next. One of them is very strong narratively. The mission to rescue Admiral Zalcoris has a ton of good moments. Zalcoris is a character that was introduced in Mass Effect 2 as the antagonist of Tali's loyalty mission. In that, he's trying to get her exiled for treason and playing dirty as he does so. But when you talk to him, he expresses his view on the Geth-Quarian conflict, and you have this interesting moment where Shepard's goals line up more with the antagonist of the mission than their own squad mate. In Mass Effect 3, it's made clear that he's been right the entire time, and by this point, Tali has actually more come around to his side. He's also characterized very strongly. He demands that you rescue his crew instead of him, and he refuses to give you his coordinates unless you pass a speech check to convince him that his leadership is still needed to prevent further deaths. It's essentially a redemption arc, where we're the ones being redeemed, seeing that he was right all along and is genuinely a good guy. To be clear, you do have the option to disagree with Chorus and support the war with the Geth, but the games push so heavily towards peace that this choice ends up about as one-sided as saving David. The other of the two missions, and the scene that plays after you've completed either one, are where things start to really fall apart fast. First, let's look at the scene that plays after completing one mission.
That's a fully evolved AI.
Yes, we do not agree with the goals of the old machines, but we find this growth beautiful, indicative of life.
Indicative of life? The Geth were already alive! With this, they completely abandon any semblance of the Geth being a unique, semi-hive mind that is insanely alien to the way we perceive existence. They have now gone into the old trope of craving sentience, wanting to be real, something they very explicitly did not want before.
I wanted to treat AI with more respect than the tired Pinocchio, I want to be a real boy cliches of Commander Data. The Geth are machines. There's absolutely no reason they should want to be organics. They should be allowed to be strong enough to want to better themselves, not change themselves.
The Geth have never craved individuality. In fact, they've scorned it. Mass Effect 2 ends with a fight against a Reaper larva. The humans captured have been reduced into genetic material and used to create this Reaper, combining them all into one grand machine. It is a monstrosity. This entire section is meant to evoke disgust and horror, and your squad mates respond accordingly, except for Legion.
An interesting choice, Shepard Commander. Your species was offered everything Geth aspired to. True unity, understanding, transcendence.
This thing is everything the Geth ever wanted. They all want to be together, with no Geth ever being alone. The exact opposite of individuality. That final conversation that I mentioned is Legion telling Shepard about the grand project the Geth were constructing. A megastructure that can house every single Geth program, so none are ever alone again. You cannot get further from individuality. If we jump to the end of the storyline, we can see that the writers really doubled down on making this individuality everything the Geth want. Again, they would be alive. And this insistence on using the Reaper code is entirely at odds with the philosophy of the Geth in Mass Effect 2. Remember how I said Cris was Legion's writer? That was only half true. He was Legion's writer for Mass Effect 2. He was not brought back for Mass Effect 3. And the most simple, depressing proof that the new writers just did not understand what the Geth were is this iconic line.
Do you remember the question that caused the creators to attack us, Tali? Does this unit have a soul?
But that question, does this unit have a soul, is not correct. That was not the question asked. We know this because Legion will play you the recording of the question when it was asked.
Mistress Hala Dama, unit has an inquiry.
What is it, 431?
Do these units have a soul?
Who taught you that word?
We learned it ourselves.
The question was, do these units have a soul? This might seem like such a tiny thing to harp on, but it shows that they truly just could not grasp the concept of a race that does not think on an individual level. Why else would they retcon the question that is the emotional core of this moment? In Mass Effect 1, you fight Geth who have decided to worship the Reapers and serve them in hopes of receiving their technology, a Reaper body to upload all their programs into. Legion teaches you that these were not representative of the Geth as a whole, but rather that they are heretics who split off from the main Geth population. Most Geth did not want to work with the Reapers, but it wasn't due to an objection to the whole mass extermination of organic life thing. They were against the promised reward. This split in Geth gets so bad that Legion works with you explicitly because you killed so many Geth heretics in Mass Effect 1. His loyalty mission is exterminating or forcefully reprogramming the bulk of the heretic population. And then in Mass Effect 3, he pushes the exact heretic ideology, the Geth growing stronger through Reaper tech. Now, there are a few ways you can say this is explained in-universe. The Geth megastructure was destroyed, and without these Reaper upgrades, the Quarians will wipe them out. So perhaps they simply feel that they have no choice, and that Reaper upgrades are preferable to extinction. But no, we know this is because Legion's writer didn't return, and the new ones just didn't understand the Geth. We know that because of what Legion says if you refuse to upload the Reaper code.
No, we will not allow you to decide our fate. Uploading the code.
This line is so hollow, simply mimicking the words said in Mass Effect 2 with zero understanding of their meaning. Uploading the code is deciding the entire fate of the Geth. It is irreversibly forcing them down the path of Reaper technology. If this is the only way to prevent Geth extinction, it is still their future being decided for them. This is a contradiction of the Geth ideology presented to us before, plain and simple.
You rejected it. You even refused the possibility of using the old machine's gifts to achieve it on your species' own terms. You are more like us than we thought.
There's only one way you could look at this and possibly say it's not just a full-on retcon. But even that explanation requires so much theorizing and headcanoning that I'm going to put it in a pinned comment instead of diving into it here. And the Geth are not the only ones facing retcons. The Quarians do as well. We see this in the other of the two missions I mentioned. In this one, you actually go inside the collective Geth intelligence, via a simulated environment that allows you to comprehend it. The whole interface with a machine intelligence by making it all cubes is super pseudo sci-fi mumbo jumbo, but it doesn't break suspension of disbelief, because we saw the technology that allows humans to interface with the Geth intelligence in Mass Effect 2 with the Overlord DLC. The premise is not the issue, but rather the information presented. We see these recordings of what occurred during the Morning War. Oh, I should probably explain what the Morning War is first. When the Geth began asking philosophical questions, the Quarians realized that the machine race they created for free labor was now intelligent to the point of sentience, and they attempted to permanently shut down every Geth. In response, the Geth fought back and absolutely destroyed the Quarians in a crushing defeat. The remaining living Quarians fled off-world, and the Geth chose not to pursue. Those Quarians then formed a society based on a flotilla of hundreds of ships traveling through space, rather than resettling onto a new world. That society has obviously evolved over the 3 centuries since the Morning War into what we see in-game. It's a rather tragic story because the actions of both sides were understandable. The Quarians' fears about the danger the Geth possessed were founded. The Geth destroy the Quarians without any issue, and in the future, many would willingly serve as the ground troopers for Sovereign. If they deactivated the Geth before they'd become a sentient living race, it would have been the right call. But we know that they were too late, and instead tried to snuff out a race of living beings into extinction. Obviously, the Geth defended themselves from this. Even in Mass Effect 1, where they are universally painted as the enemy force working for the Reapers, Shepard sympathizes with them. They couldn't be expected to simply be killed off. But in response, they destroyed the Quarians to a horrific degree. An entire population cut down to 1% of its original size. In Mass Effect 2, you learn that the Geth did not ally with the Reapers as you thought they did, but rather that it was a splinter group that did so. This makes them more sympathetic, because not only did they defend themselves in the past, the majority have not acted aggressively towards organic life in the time since. However, there's still one big act of evil that the Geth are undeniably responsible for: the genocide of the Quarians. You cannot kill millions upon millions and reduce a population down by 99% in defense. There is no way for the Geth to have defeated the Quarians in the manner they did without taking part in full-on merciless slaughter of every single one they came across, including non-combatants and children. But this mission says that the Geth only defended themselves, and every Quarian that died was acting completely aggressively when the Geth didn't want to fight. This is not just presented as the Geth perspective. These are recordings, footage. The game is presenting these as facts, and it is bullshit. The story you're shown has the Geth entirely blameless, and says that the Quarians would kill their own people if they sympathized with the Geth. It entirely rewrites the narrative to paint the Geth as pure innocent victims, and it does not make sense. There is absolutely no way for the Geth to have killed 99% of a planet's population, millions upon millions, while simply acting defensively as shown here. And of course it doesn't show you any Quarians begging for their life or being slaughtered by the Geth in brutal ways, even though that is the only way it could have gone down to get death counts that high. And it's not just retcons or omissions of the history, they also make the current Quarians more villainous. Admiral Han Garel is supposed to be the inversion of Admiral Zal'Koris. He's unashamedly on your side in Tali's loyalty mission, but it becomes quite clear that his opinions on the Geth are wrong and actively against Shepard's interests. However, in Mass Effect 3, he doesn't reveal a different side of himself that was shown slightly in the past. He's just an entirely different character. In Mass Effect 2, he's an admiral who genuinely cares about his people, and Tali especially. He was a close friend of her father. But he is clearly stubborn and willing to bend the rules. In Mass Effect 3, he's a psychopathic moron. You disable a massive Geth Dreadnaught to give the Quarians a chance to flee the battle they're in. Instead, Han Garel immediately attacks the Dreadnaught and forces the entire fleet to follow his lead. And keep in mind, this is a Dreadnaught that you are currently on! He does not hesitate to kill you and Tali, somebody who he clearly cared about, the daughter of one of his closest friends. And at this point in the story, she's a fellow admiral as well, usually. He is absolutely remorseless, simply cutting off communication after condemning you to near certain death. And at the end of the quest line, the final check is convincing him to stand down and not attack the Geth. If you are unable to persuade him and do not stop Legion from uploading the code, his actions lead to the deaths of millions of Quarians and the final extinction of his entire race. You don't even get any sort of dialogue with him after the fact, where he admits what a prick he's been. He's purely an obstacle. There is this argument between Admiral Shala Ran and him, where the Quarian fleet gets stronger if you support Han Garel and weaker if you support Shala Ran, showing that he is making the right call here. But this is the game telling you and not showing you that he's a competent commander. We never actually see him make a single good call in this game. And as much as Mass Effect 3 does basically ruin the character, it does feel really good to hit him. Just like it feels really good to hit that subscribe button. I know nobody likes the shilling and stuff, but apparently it works, so I'm trying it. I'm bringing up the graph now, you can't stop me. 5% of people who watch or subscribe, 95% aren't. That's mean, guys. If you like what you see, subscribe, it's free, and let's be honest, you are not gonna get spammed. Alright, back to the actual video. When you don't think about it, this whole arc feels great. And I want to make it clear that I don't think somebody is a fool for being invested in it or really liking it. If you're genuinely very satisfied with how this whole storyline played out and concluded, that's great. You're not wrong for feeling that way. It does a lot well. You get this bitter feeling as you play and fight the Geth yet again, now really seeing just how little they have sought conflict. They didn't want the Morning War, they didn't want this war, and they really didn't want to ally with the Reapers. You feel like you're working with the villains because you have no other choice. And that ending where every Geth is now a full AI, a fully sentient individual, feels great. Securing peace between the Geth and the Quarians is something that depends on you making the right choices throughout Mass Effect 2 and 3, so you feel very accomplished when you achieve it. And when you fail to, having to decide which side will face extinction really hurts. But once you begin to think about it, the whole arc just starts to unravel. One of the most obvious ways this begins, the first chink in the armor, is Legion's death. When you side with the Quarians and are forced to kill them, it's heartbreaking, yet entirely in character. Legion's hostility and Tali's response can both be foreshadowed in Mass Effect 2.
Once old machines are defeated, however, creators will answer for actions against our people.
Captain, if Legion acts suspiciously, I'll kill it. You know that.
No, we will not allow you to decide our fate. Uploading the code.
Outside that one monumentally stupid line of dialogue from Legion, it's a great scene. But Legion still dies if you side with the Geth or broker peace, and their death in those circumstances is fucking stupid.
Error. Copying code is insufficient. Direct personality dissemination required. Shepard Commander, I must go to them. I'm sorry. It's the only way.
It's code! There's no reason that copying it should be insufficient. And this is not foreshadowed at all. It's so obvious that they were just unwilling or unable to make Legion a full squad mate, and decided to go for a cheap gut punch as the reason for them not joining you after this. Not to harp on it, but compare this to Morden's sacrifice. With Legion, you don't even have a reason for this to occur. For Morden, not only do you have an entirely logical reason, there's genuinely no alternative. And once you've started to pick apart this storyline, it all falls apart. You realize the Quarians are reduced to villainous caricatures, and the Geth are so out of character that they're barely even the same race as their previous iterations. At this point, you might be under the impression that I dislike this storyline and think Legion is simply a poorly done character. But that's not the case. This whole matter upsets me because Legion is so close to being one of, if not the best characters in the entire trilogy. Their strongest moments are phenomenal. Mass Effect 2 does a great job at having them be so completely alien in their thinking, but still understandable. Cris L. had very distinct ideas about how to write an AI and did a phenomenal job.
How I wrote Legion and EDI came from sitting down and thinking about how a real machine intelligence free of glandular distractions, subjective perception / mental blocks, and philosophical angst, fear of death, why am I here, would view the world. Star Trek was a minor inspiration, though in the negative, I didn't want the Geth to be either the Borg, you are different so we will absorb / destroy you, or Data, I am different so I want to be you.
But alongside that, Legion is just very charming. There's a lot of hilarious moments from how people respond to them, as well as them having the best dry wit in the series.
A few minor changes were made to reduce the risk of Geth infiltration. We apologize for the inconvenience.
Geth do not infiltrate.
You should leave your personal synthetic assistant at home. They're not allowed on public shuttles anymore.
Geth do not intentionally infiltrate.
Even with the absolute butchering of their motivations in 3, this charm is still there. They capture the personality very well. which is why it doesn't just feel like a hollow imitation of a beloved character, but rather that character being very inconsistent with their previous appearance. To make clear what I mean, take a look at the Geth VI. Since every squad mate in Mass Effect 2 can die, there are two ways for Mass Effect 3 to work around their Schrodinger's status. The game can either rework any scenes that would include them to work without them, or they can fill their role with a different character. With the latter, sometimes they'll use characters that are already established to exist, like how Admiral Daro Zen will replace Tali if she's dead. Sometimes it's a new character who is still around even if the squad mate is alive, like with Paddock Wicks, and sometimes the replacement only shows up if that squad mate is dead, like with Dreadnaught Dag. Legion's replacement is very unique. They are a recreation of Legion that lacks their memories. Your interactions with them differ greatly depending on if you kept and activated Legion or not. If you did activate Legion but they died in the suicide mission, you keep referring to it as Legion, trying to make it remember something it never will. A copy of your friend who not only doesn't know who you are, but distrusts you. If you didn't activate Legion, they're simply called the Geth VI, and they will give you the information about the difference between Geth and the Reaper-worshipping heretics that Legion normally teaches you in Mass Effect 2. This might get a little confusing because if you met Legion, the Geth VI is called Legion. I'm just gonna call it the Geth VI to simplify it a bit, and if it has this hologrammy piece, then it is not the real Legion. Their philosophy is identical to Legion, in that they work with you to sever the Reaper control of the Geth, and at the end of the storyline, they want to upload the Reaper upgrade code. But there is still a very clear difference in personality between the Geth VI and Legion. The conversations you have with this copy are much closer to the first conversations you have with Legion after activating them, whereas the conversations you have with the real Legion feel like a continuation of the rapport you two had built up by the end of Mass Effect 2. I really like the contrast between these two. It makes sense that Legion would be significantly more hostile towards organics and you if the first time that they ever worked with organics was while the Geth were actively under assault from the Quarians. There are some other interesting contrasts between the two. For example, the Geth VI seems to dislike the Reapers more than Legion does. Compare how Legion and the Geth VI describe their time interfaced with a Reaper. Here's Legion.
What was interfacing with a Reaper like?
They are magnitudes above us. A single thought was immense, overwhelming, unknowable.
You're making them sound godlike.
Their forms are advanced but mundane. We do not view the old machines as analogs to deities. However, we have gained perspective on why others would imbue them with these qualities.
And here's the Geth VI.
What was interfacing with a Reaper like?
Unproductive. We gained no significant data beyond that which we have already shared.
I honestly love the disrespect. But with the contrast between the two, you can see how Legion does have a genuinely great personality even when you set their philosophy aside. That's why it stings so much to see this complete mischaracterization. It's much harder to enjoy an inconsistent character. A character whose actions cannot be traced to specific points in the story that influence them, but rather to the change in writers. A character who gets weaker the more you get invested into them. When you find Legion, one of the bigger questions is why they have a piece of N7 armor patching up a hole in their chest. It's revealed that it's actually a piece of your armor, and there was a large amount of time between them taking the damage and patching it up with your armor. When you ask why they handled it this way, they don't have an answer. This implies an emotional connection. It implies that there is much more beyond the surface of this, potentially something that would shake up the way the characters think of AI. But we know the answer, and not because of clever plot beats, well-done characterization, or interesting reveals. We know because of what Legion's old writer posted online.
The truth is that the armor was a decision imposed on me. The concept artist decided to put a hole in the Geth. Then, in a moment of whimsy, they spackled a bit of Shep's armor over it. Someone who got paid a lot more money than me decided it was really cool and insisted on the hole and the N7 armor. So I said, okay, Legion gets taken down when you meet it, so it can get the hole then and weld a piece of Shep's armor when it reactivates to represent its integration with the Normandy's crew. When integrating aboard a new Geth ship, it would swap memories and runtimes, not physical hardware. but higher paid decided that it would be cooler if Legion were obsessed with Shepard and stalking him. That didn't make any sense to me. To be obsessed, you have to have emotions. The Geth's whole shtick is, to paraphrase Legion, we do not experience emotions, but we understand how they affect you. All I could do was downplay the required obsession as much as I could.
There's nothing more to this. It's there because somebody thought it looked cool. It's subtle and mysterious because Legion's writer disliked it. We know that there is nothing more to this. Legion is a character that raises insanely interesting questions that have disappointing and sometimes nonsense answers. I still love Legion, even though they were done such a massive disservice. And while I've thrown quite a few harsh words at Legion's new writers, they are not bad writers. Without Cris working on Mass Effect 3, two people took over writing Legion. One was Sylvia F., who was one of the main writers for Lair of the Shadow Broker, which is pretty much universally considered a highlight of the trilogy. And the other was Patrick Weeks, who's written a ton of great stuff throughout the series, including Mordin Solus! Not only are they not bad writers, I feel pretty confident calling them damn good writers. They just approached Legion with a philosophy that was at odds with how Cris wrote them. The contradictions that these two opposing philosophies led to are the issue. When looking at it standalone, Legion's content in 3 is not bad, and these two are very talented. Every issue with Legion has an easy solution. You can fix their small presence in Mass Effect 2 already by hitting a single toggle with the save editor. Even with the fundamental flaws with their writing in Mass Effect 3, the execution is pretty phenomenal. That's why it's so satisfying the first time you play through, before you think on things. And the issues that are there are genuinely not hard to fix. The final part of the storyline on Rannoch is brilliant in concept. Shepard stands face to face with a Reaper that's still reeling from a direct missile blast. They stand on the ground, using a targeting laser to paint the Reaper's weak point so that the entire Quarian fleet can fire on it with pinpoint accuracy. This is a phenomenal representation of the entire series. Shepard is the guide, the one who faces the Reapers directly. They put themselves at the forefront in the most danger, but they simply are not able to do it alone. They show the fleets and forces where to strike so that they can work as one to take down a massive threat. Whether or not peace can be brokered depends on your actions in Mass Effect 2 and 3. Saving Admiral Zalcoris, Legion and Tali's loyalty mission, resolving their argument peacefully. These all come into play. If you've done well enough, peace is an option. It's a rather in-depth setup, and it's great. And the fact that peace is achieved by having the Quarians hold their fire to show the Geth that they can be trusted perfectly harkens back to what Legion says to Zalcoris in Mass Effect 2.
So your people would be open to peace?
Not without additional data that suggests coexistence is possible or desirable for creators. When the creators have believed victory is possible, they have attacked us 100% of the time.
And it sucks, because all this really clever stuff is tied to a fucking stupid resolution. Uploading the Reaper code to make every Geth a true AI is such an awful end to the arc. It says that no, the Quarians and Geth could never get along as they were. It's only through the Geth changing entirely that peace is possible. It's all centered around Legion using the Reaper tech that the Geth chose to reject, trying to achieve an individuality that they never wanted, and the answer to a question different to the one that was asked. If you're invested in this storyline and the characters, you're punished by seeing poorly done retcons rather than rewarded with hard-hitting callbacks. So how to fix it? Drop the fully evolved AI Geth achieving sentience crap entirely, and instead of uploading Reaper code in the climax, have Legion delete Reaper code. Make it so that when the Reaper died, the Geth it controlled began malfunctioning en masse. Have Legion wipe this code and restore Geth to their prior software, something that it's been established Geth can do. Have the Quarians make peace with the Geth as they are, the living people that they went to war with, as opposed to them getting along because the Geth changed entirely. This would also make Legion's pointless death significantly better. They admit to you that they still possess Reaper code in their programming, and when you reunite with them, you see that they are being used to broadcast a Reaper signal. it would be reasonable to say that because of this, it's not possible for Legion to scrub themselves of code, that they lack a clean backup. Make it so Legion is a danger. Have them be a potential way for the Reaper code to reactivate and be broadcasted out to all Geth yet again. Have them willingly shut themselves down so that they will not present a threat to anyone. These are really small changes, but they're all that's needed. As it stands, personally, I would have preferred the Geth Quarian plotline just go unresolved entirely, rather than have the Geth be turned into what they were explicitly written not to be. Legion having their goals and motivations ruined like this was just so absurdly unnecessary. You deserved better, Legion. But hey, in terms of BioWare characters dragged down by their appearance in a sequel, you fared a hell of a lot better than Anders.